Mira didn't know that the man they called the Alpha King hadn't spoken to a woman in 3 years. She didn't know that every noble family in the 5 kingdoms had sent their most beautiful daughters to win his hand. And she certainly didn't know that, when he walked into that throne room filled with silk gowns and glittering jewels, he would ignore every single one of them to find her. All she knew was that the kitchen smelled of burned bread, and cook would have her hide if the royal feast wasn't perfect. "Move faster, girl!" Cook's voice cracked like a whip across the stone floor. "The ceremony starts within the hour, and if so much as one platter is cold—" "Yes, ma'am." Mira ducked her head and hurried toward the ovens, her worn shoes silent against the flagstones. She'd learned long ago that being noticed in the royal kitchens was dangerous. Better to be a shadow, quick and quiet, finishing her tasks before anyone remembered she existed. The castle thrummed with an energy she'd never felt before. Servants rushed through the corridors, carrying armfuls of white roses and golden ribbons. The bride selection ceremony. She'd heard whispers about it for weeks, how King Darius would finally choose a wife from the dozens of noble ladies who travelled here from across the kingdom. Not that it mattered to someone like her. Mira pulled a tray of honey cakes from the oven, her hands steady despite the heat. She was good at this work, even if no one ever noticed, invisible, forgettable. The way it had always been since the day her mother left her at the convent gates, with nothing but a note saying she couldn't keep her. "You're nothing special," the Mother Superior had told her when she was old enough to understand. "The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." She'd accepted it, buried herself in work, kept her head down, survived. When the convent had sent her to work in the royal kitchens at 16, she'd thought it was a blessing. 3 meals a day and a warm place to sleep. What more could someone like her ask for? The sound of trumpets echoed through the castle walls, followed by the rustle of silk and the nervous laughter of noble ladies. The ceremony was beginning. "Take these to the side table near the throne room." Cook thrust a silver platter into her hands. "And don't you dare drop them." Mira nodded and slipped through the service corridors that connected the kitchen to the great hall. She'd memorized every hidden passage in the castle over the past 2 years, the places where a servant could move without being seen by the nobility who filled these halls. The side door to the throne room stood slightly ajar, and she could hear Lord Chancellor Bergen's booming voice as he addressed the crowd. "Your Majesty, the finest daughters of our allied kingdoms stand before you, each one beautiful, accomplished and worthy to stand at your side as queen." Mira pressed herself against the wall and carefully placed the platter on the side table. Through the crack in the door, she caught a glimpse of the spectacle inside. 23 women stood in a perfect line, each one more stunning than the last. Gowns of emerald silk, sapphire velvet, and cloth of gold caught the light from 100 candles. Diamonds sparkled at their throats. Their hair was styled in elaborate braids and crowned with jewelled pins. They were everything she would never be. And there, on the obsidian throne at the far end of the hall, sat the Alpha King himself. Mira had never seen him this close before. King Darius was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 30, with dark hair and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a kingdom. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Even from this distance, she could see they were the colour of storm clouds, sharp and intelligent and impossibly sad. He looked bored. "Lady Celestine of House Ravencrest," the Chancellor announced, and a blonde woman stepped forward with a curtsy so deep her gown pooled around her like water. Trained in 7 languages, accomplished in music and poetry. The king's gaze swept over her without interest. Lady Evangeline of House Thornwick, master of diplomatic protocol and beloved by her people. Another curtsy, another dismissive glance. One by one the Chancellor presented each woman. One by one King Darius looked right through them as if they weren't there. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd of nobles watching from the sides of the hall. This wasn't how the ceremony was supposed to go. Mira found herself leaning closer to the door, fascinated despite herself. What was wrong with him? These women were perfect. Any one of them would make a beautiful queen. Then the king stood. The hall fell silent. 23 perfect women held their breath, waiting. King Darius walked down the steps from his throne, his boots echoing against the marble. The crowd parted before him, and Mira pressed herself further into the shadows. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, all-controlled power and dangerous calm. He walked past Lady Celestine without a glance, past Lady Evangeline as if she didn't exist, past every single woman in that glittering line until he reached the end of the hall, where confused whispers had begun to grow louder. Then he stopped, his head turned slightly, and those storm-grey eyes fixed on something beyond the crowd, something the nobles couldn't see, the servants' door. Mira's heart slammed against her ribs. He couldn't be looking at her. It was impossible. She was hidden in shadow, invisible like always. But his gaze found hers through the crack in the door, and something impossible happened. Heat. It shot up her arm, spreading through her chest, settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. The world narrowed to those silver-grey eyes and the way they seemed to see straight through to her soul. The platter slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor. The sound rang through the sudden silence like a bell. King Darius was moving before the last echo faded, crossing the hall in long strides that sent nobles scrambling out of his way. Mira backed away from the door, her pulse thundering in her ears, but there was nowhere to run. The service corridor was a dead end. The door swung open, and there he was, filling the doorway, so much larger than she'd imagined. The scent of cedar and rain seemed to surround him, and that impossible heat pulsed between them like something alive. "You," he said, and his voice was rough velvet, warm honey over broken glass. "What are your name?" Mira opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She pressed herself against the stone wall, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I asked your name." Gentler now, but with an authority that made her bones melt. "Mira," she whispered. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, wonder, as if her name was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "Mira," he repeated, and the way he said it made her feel like she was someone worth saying. "How long have you worked here?" 2 years, Your Majesty." The words came out in a rush. "I'm sorry about the platter. I'll clean it up. I'll pay for it somehow, I promise." "Look at me." The command was soft, but it shot through her like lightning. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, she raised her eyes to his. The moment their gazes met, the world exploded into golden light. It wasn't visible. She knew that somehow, but she felt it everywhere. A thread of pure warmth spinning out from her chest to his, binding them together with something that felt older than the mountains, stronger than the sea. The empty place inside her that she'd carried for 19 years suddenly blazed with belonging. Mine. The word whispered through her mind in a voice that wasn't her own. Mine, mine, mine. King Darius stepped closer, his hand rising toward her face before he seemed to catch himself. His fingers curled into a fist at his side. "Gods above," he breathed. "It's you." "Your Majesty?" Lord Chancellor Bergen's voice echoed from the throne room, tight with confusion. The ceremony, the ladies awaiting. King Darius never looked away from her face. "Tell them to go home, Bergen." "I beg your pardon." "Send them home, all of them." He stepped back, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. "I have found my bride." The words hit her like a physical blow. Bride. Her. Impossible. "I don't understand," she whispered. For the first time since she'd seen him, King Darius smiled. It transformed his entire face, washing away the sadness and leaving something fierce and tender and absolutely devastating. "You will," he said. "We have a great deal to discuss, Mira, but first—" He glanced at the broken platter scattered across the floor, then back at her, with something that might have been amusement. "Let's get you somewhere more comfortable." Behind him, she could hear the confused voices of 23 perfect noble ladies and their families. The chaos of a ceremony gone impossibly wrong. But none of it seemed to matter when he held out his hand to her with infinite patience. "Will you come with me?" Every rational thought she possessed screamed at her to refuse, to apologize and disappear back into the kitchen where she belonged. She was nobody, nothing, a discarded orphan who scrubbed pots for a living, but that golden thread hummed between them, warm and alive and absolutely certain. And for the first time in her life, Mira chose to trust the impossible. The throne room erupted the moment Mira took his hand. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot be serious!" Lord Castellan's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. His face was purple with rage, his daughter Celestine standing frozen behind him in her cloth of gold gown. "A kitchen servant! This is madness!" "Choose one of them," Lady Ravencrest shrieked, gesturing wildly at the line of stunned noble women. "Any of them would make a suitable queen." King Darius didn't even turn around. His hand was warm and steady around Mira's, that golden thread between them humming with certainty. But she could feel herself trembling, the weight of 24 furious stares burning into her back. "I made my choice," he said calmly. "The ceremony is over." "But she's nobody." The words came from somewhere in the crowd, sharp and cruel. "A foundling, an orphan." Heat flooded Mira's cheeks. Of course they knew. Everyone always knew eventually. She tried to pull her hand free, but King Darius tightened his grip gently. "She is my mate," he said, and something in his voice made the entire hall fall silent. "And if anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to discuss it with me, privately." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Even Lord Castellan seemed to shrink back, his protest dying on his lips. But Mira barely heard any of it. His mate. The word echoed in her mind, foreign and impossible and terrifying. "I need to—" she whispered, then stopped. What? Go back to the kitchen? Pretend this never happened? Run? "Come," King Darius murmured, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. "Let's talk somewhere quieter." He led her out of the throne room, through a side door she hadn't even noticed, his presence beside her solid and reassuring even as her world tilted off its axis. They walked through corridors she'd only seen from the servants' passages, past tapestries worth more than she'd ever earn in a lifetime. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. "My study, where we won't be interrupted." The study was nothing like she'd imagined a king's private space would be. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines worn with use. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across comfortable chairs and a desk scattered with papers. It felt lived in, warm, safe. The thought came unbidden, and she pushed it away. Nothing about this was safe. Kings didn't choose kitchen servants as brides. This had to be some kind of mistake. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to one of the chairs by the fire. "Please." Mira perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, ready to bolt. King Darius settled into the chair across from her, and for the first time she got a good look at him in proper light. He was beautiful in the way wild things were beautiful, dangerous and untamed despite the civilized clothes. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, touching his collar. There were scars on his hands, old ones that spoke of battles fought and won. But it was his eyes that held her, storm grey and impossibly patient, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her to understand. "You're afraid," he said softly. It wasn't a question. Mira nodded anyway, not trusting her voice. "Of me? Of this?" She gestured helplessly between them. "Of whatever's happening, I don't understand any of it." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely. "What do you know about mate bonds?" "Nothing." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not. I wasn't raised with stories about alpha kings and magic. I grew up in a convent. They taught us to scrub floors and keep quiet." Something flickered across his face. Anger, but not at her. "Tell me about that, your childhood." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she flinched. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean—" "Darius," he said quietly. "When we're alone, just Darius, and you don't need to apologize for asking questions. I want to know about you, Mira. Everything." The way he said her name made that warmth pulse behind her ribs again. She found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "My mother left me at the convent when I was 3. I don't remember her. The Mother Superior said she was probably dead, or maybe she just didn't want me." The old pain was still there, but distant now, like an echo of an echo. "They kept me until I was 16, then sent me here to work. I've been in the kitchens ever since." "And before today, had you ever felt anything like what happened between us in that corridor?" Mira shook her head mutely. "It's called a mate bond," he said, his voice gentle but certain. "It's rare, even among our kind. Most wolves settle for someone compatible, someone who makes political sense. But sometimes—" He paused, his gaze distant. "Sometimes the goddess chooses for us, creates a connection that can't be broken or denied." "Our kind?" The words felt clumsy in her mouth. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You don't know." "Know what?" For a long moment he studied her face. Then, slowly, he said, "You're a shifter, Mira, like me. That's why you felt the bond." The world tilted. "That's not possible. I would know if I was—" "Not if it was suppressed." His voice turned hard. "Not if someone made sure you never learned what you were." Something cold settled in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "The convent." He was very still now, predatory calm wrapped around him like armour. "What did they give you? Medicines? Tea? Something to keep you healthy?" Mira's hand went to her throat automatically. "Mother Superior gave us all a tonic every morning, said it would keep us from getting sick. But I stopped taking it when I came here. The castle has its own healers." "How long ago was that?" 2 years. The words came out in a whisper as understanding began to dawn. "You're saying they were poisoning me?" "Suppressing your wolf, keeping you from shifting, from knowing what you were." His hands clenched into fists. "It's illegal, punishable by death." "But why would they—" She stopped, the answer hitting her like a physical blow. "Because I was unwanted, because someone left me there and paid them to make sure I stayed nothing." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Then Darius spoke, his voice deadly quiet. "You were never nothing. You are my mate, chosen by the goddess herself. You are precious beyond measure, and anyone who tried to convince you otherwise will answer for it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her breath catch. "I don't know how to be what you need me to be." "You already are." He leaned back, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "But I'm not asking you to transform overnight. The bond is patient, Mira. It will wait." "How long?" "However long you need." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some elaborate game. But there was only honesty there, and a kind of gentle hunger that made her chest tighten. "Those women," she said finally, "the ones in the throne room, they were perfect." Perfect for someone else, maybe. He shifted forward again, close enough that she could smell cedar and rain on his skin. "Do you know what I saw when I looked at them?" She shook her head. "Nothing. No spark, no recognition, no pull. They were beautiful, accomplished, everything a king should want in a bride." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But when I looked at you, hiding in the shadows where you thought no one could see you, I felt the missing piece of my soul click into place." The words hit her like a physical touch. She could feel tears stinging her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know." He didn't move closer, didn't try to touch her, just sat there being patient and solid and impossibly gentle. "I'm scared too." "You are?" "I've been waiting for you for 30 years, Mira. I was starting to think the goddess had forgotten about me. And now you're here, and I'm terrified of doing something wrong, of moving too fast, of scaring you away." The vulnerability in his confession undid something tight in her chest. This powerful, dangerous man was afraid too, of losing her. "I don't know how any of this works," she said quietly. "Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." He stood slowly, giving her time to object, then held out his hand. "But first you need food and rest. When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. "This morning, I think, before the ceremony preparations started." His expression darkened. "That was 8 hours ago." "I'm used to it. We eat when we can in the kitchens." "Not any more." The authority was back in his voice, but it wrapped around her like protection instead of threat. "You'll take your meals with me from now on, and you'll have a proper room with a real bed and clothes that fit." The kindness was overwhelming. "Your Majesty, Darius, I can't. The other servants will—" "Are you worried about what they'll think?" "I'm worried about what I'll think." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm worried that I'll start believing this is real, and then I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream." Something shifted in his expression, something fierce and tender and absolutely certain. "It's real, Mira." He stepped closer, and that golden warmth pulsed between them like a living thing. "I'm real. This bond is real. And if anyone tries to take it away from us, they'll have to go through me first." The promise in his voice made her knees weak. For just a moment she let herself believe it. Let herself imagine what it would feel like to be chosen, to be wanted, to be precious to someone. 3 days, she whispered. "What?" "Give me 3 days to decide if I can do this, if I can be what you need." His smile was soft and devastating. "You can have as long as you want. But Mira—" "Yes?" "You already are exactly what I need." The days that followed were a strange rhythm of discovery and wonder. Mira woke the first morning in a room that was larger than the entire dormitory she'd shared at the convent. Soft blue silk hung at the windows, and the bed, gods, the bed was big enough for 4 people and covered in blankets so fine they felt like air against her skin. A knock at the door made her scramble upright, clutching the covers to her chest. "Come in." A woman entered carrying a silver tray, her uniform marking her as upper household staff. She had kind eyes and greying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Good morning, my lady. I'm Anna, your personal maid. His Majesty thought you might like breakfast in your room this morning." My lady. The title sat strangely, like clothes that didn't quite fit. "I can dress myself," Mira said quickly. "I don't need—" "Of course you can." Anna set the tray on a small table by the window with practised efficiency. "But perhaps you'd let me help anyway. I've been without a lady to attend for 3 years now. I've missed it." Something in her tone made Mira look closer. There was genuine warmth there, not the polite mask she'd expected. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you." Anna smiled. "Shall we start with something simple? A day dress for walking in the gardens? His Majesty mentioned you might enjoy some fresh air." An hour later, Mira found herself standing in the castle gardens, wearing a dress of soft green wool that actually fit her properly. Anna had braided her hair with ribbon that matched, and for the first time in her life, Mira felt almost beautiful. "There you are." She turned to find Darius walking toward her down a path lined with late autumn roses. He'd traded his formal clothes for simple dark breeches and a white shirt that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. His hair was tousled by the morning breeze, and when he smiled at her, something warm unfurled in her chest. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, stopping a careful arm's length away. "Better than I have in years." It was true. Despite everything, she'd slept deeply, dreamlessly, as if some part of her that had been wound tight for 19 years had finally relaxed. "Good. I thought you might like to see the gardens. They were my mother's pride." They walked together in comfortable silence, their footsteps crunching softly on gravel paths. The gardens were beautiful, even in the dying season, with paths winding between fountains and carefully tended beds where the last roses bloomed in defiance of the coming winter. "Tell me about her," Mira said. "Your mother." His expression softened. "She was fierce, kind but fierce. She used to say that a queen's job wasn't to be perfect, it was to be real." "She sounds wonderful." "She would have liked you." He paused beside a marble bench carved with twining vines. "She always said the best leaders were the ones who remembered what it felt like to have nothing." They sat together, and Mira was acutely aware of the space between them, not uncomfortable, but charged. That golden thread hummed constantly now, a warm presence at the edge of her consciousness. "What was it like?" she asked. "Growing up knowing you'd be king?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Lonely," he said finally. "Everyone wanted something from me. Alliance, favour, power. I learned early not to trust easily." "But you trust me." The words slipped out before she could think better of them. He turned to face her fully, those storm-grey eyes serious. "The bond doesn't work that way. I can't not trust you, Mira. You're part of me now." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "That doesn't frighten you?" "Terrifies me," he admitted with a rueful smile. "I've been in control of everything in my life since I was 12 years old, and now there's you, and I'd give you anything you asked for without thinking twice." The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. "I wouldn't ask for anything." "I know. That's why I trust you." They talked through the morning as they walked, sharing stories and fragments of their vastly different lives. Mira found herself laughing, actually laughing, when Darius told her about the time he'd tried to sneak out of the castle as a boy and gotten stuck in a laundry chute. "The maids found me 3 hours later, covered in soap and convinced I was a ghost," he said, grinning at the memory. "I couldn't sit comfortably for a week after my father was done with me." "Serves you right," Mira said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Though I can't imagine you small enough to fit in a laundry chute." "I was a very determined 10-year-old. Lunch was served in a small dining room that overlooked the courtyard, just the two of them, with food that was simple but perfectly prepared. Mira had never eaten a meal where she wasn't rushing to finish before someone needed her for something else. "This is nice," she said without thinking, then flushed. It is nice." Darius reached across the table and brushed his fingers against hers, just for a moment. The touch sent heat racing up her arm. "I haven't enjoyed a meal this much in years." That afternoon he showed her the library. Mira had never seen so many books in one place, leather-bound volumes stretching from floor to ceiling in a room that seemed to go on forever. "Can you read?" he asked gently, and she nodded. "The nuns taught us. They said education was important, even for foundlings." She ran her fingers along the spine of a book of poetry, marvelling at the gold lettering. "Though I never had access to anything like this. Consider it yours now, all of it." The casual way he said it, as if he were offering her an apple instead of a kingdom's worth of knowledge, made her dizzy. "Darius, I can't—" "You can." He moved closer, and she could smell cedar and rain on his skin. "You can have anything you want, Mira. Ask me." "I don't know how to want things," she whispered. Something fierce crossed his expression. "Then I'll teach you." That evening they dined together again, this time in his private chambers. The conversation flowed easier now, punctuated by shared smiles and moments when their eyes would meet and hold just a beat too long. "Tell me something you've always wondered about," he said over dessert. Mira considered. "What's it like, shifting?" His expression grew thoughtful. "Like coming home to yourself, like remembering something you'd forgotten." He tilted his head. "Your wolf is still there, you know, suppressed but not gone. When the drugs fully clear your system, you'll be able to shift." "What if I can't? What if they damage something that can't be fixed? Then we'll figure it out together. His certainty was absolute. But I don't think that's what happened. I can sense her sometimes, your wolf. She's just sleeping. 3 days of this. 3 days of kindness and patience and feeling like she mattered to someone. 3 days of falling a little more under the spell of storm-grey eyes and gentle hands and a voice that said her name like a prayer. On the third night, as they walked back from dinner, Darius stopped in the corridor outside her room. "Your 3 days are up," he said quietly. Mira's heart hammered against her ribs. "I know." "And?" She looked up at him, this man who'd chosen her out of a room full of perfection, who'd been patient with her fear and gentle with her broken places, who looked at her like she was precious. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "That's all right. I'll be scared with you." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "But I need to know, Mira. Are you staying?" The word trembled on her lips. Such a simple thing, such an enormous thing. "Yes," she breathed. The smile that spread across his face was brilliant. Thank God. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "May I kiss you?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. His lips were soft and warm and careful, as if she were made of something precious that might break. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and when she sighed against his mouth and melted into him, he made a low sound of satisfaction that vibrated through her bones. When they broke apart, she was breathing hard, her hands fisted in his shirt. "Mira," he said, and her name was rough honey in his voice. "I know." She could feel it too, the shift between them, the way something that had been tentative was now becoming real. "Sleep well," he murmured, pressing one more soft kiss to her forehead. "Tomorrow we start planning our future." She watched him walk away, her fingers pressed to her lips, warmth spreading through her like golden wine. For the first time since this all began, she let herself really believe it. She was chosen. She was wanted. She was, well, the little kitchen mouse thinks she's a queen. Mira spun around to find Lord Castellan emerging from the shadows at the end of the corridor, his face twisted with malice. Behind him stood 2 guards she didn't recognize, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. "Lord Castellan." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "It's late. Shouldn't you be in your own chambers? Shouldn't you be in the kitchens where you belong?" He stepped closer, and she caught the smell of wine on his breath. "Did you really think this would last, that he wouldn't come to his senses?" "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't. You're just an ignorant little nobody who got lucky." His smile was cruel. "But luck runs out, girl, and when it does, you'll find out exactly what happens to servants who forget their place." Fear crawled up her spine, but she forced herself to stand straight. "The king chose me?" "The king was bewitched." Lord Castellan's voice dropped to a whisper. "And we have proof." The guards stepped forward, and Mira's blood went cold. Proof of what? Witchcraft. Dark magic. How else could a nothing like you snare an Alpha King? He gestured to the guards. "Arrest her." "You can't." "I can. I have witnesses who will swear they saw you performing blood magic in the kitchens. Testimonies about strange lights and unnatural influence." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "By dawn, you'll be in the dungeon awaiting trial, and by sunset tomorrow, you'll be ash on the wind." The guards moved toward her, and every instinct she'd developed over 19 years of survival screamed at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. And as rough hands seized her arms and Lord Castellan's laughter echoed off the stone walls, Mira realized that sometimes believing in impossible things was just another way of setting yourself up to fall. The dungeon was exactly what Mira had imagined hell would be like. Cold stone walls wept moisture that never dried. The straw on the floor was mouldy and crawling with things she didn't want to identify. Iron bars separated her from a corridor lit by torches that cast more shadow than light. and in the cell across from hers, a skeleton hung from chains, its empty eye sockets watching her with eternal judgment. She'd been here for hours, maybe longer. Time moved strangely in the dark. Lord Castellan's guards had shoved her into the cell without ceremony, ignoring her pleas to speak to the king. The heavy door had slammed shut with a finality that echoed in her bones, and since then there had been nothing but silence and the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. She'd tried calling out at first, shouting for Darius, for anyone who might listen, but her voice had been swallowed by stone and shadow, and eventually she'd given up. The worst part wasn't the cold or the fear or even the rats that scurried past her feet when they thought she wasn't watching. The worst part was the voice in her head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Mother Superior, whispering that she should have known better. "You thought you could be something you're not," it said with cruel satisfaction. "You thought someone like him could actually want someone like you. But look where it got you. Look where believing in fairy tales always gets people like us." Mira pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The green dress Anna had helped her choose that morning was torn and dirty now, the ribbon in her hair long since lost. She looked like what she'd always been, a nobody pretending to be something she wasn't. Maybe Lord Castellan was right. Maybe she had enchanted Darius somehow, without knowing it. How else could an Alpha King choose her over women like Lady Celestine? Women who were actually worthy of a crown. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made her look up, hope flaring in her chest despite everything. But it wasn't Darius who appeared at her cell door. It was a woman she didn't recognize, elegantly dressed in midnight blue silk. Her blonde hair was perfectly arranged, and diamonds sparkled at her throat. She was beautiful in the way noble ladies were beautiful, polished and untouchable and utterly confident in her place in the world. "So," the woman said, her voice cultured and cold, "this is the famous kitchen witch." Mira struggled to her feet, trying to summon some dignity. "I don't know who you are." "Lady Evangeline Thornwick. I was one of the women your little spell prevented from becoming queen." She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. "I thought I should see for myself what all the fuss was about." "There was no spell." "Of course there was." Lady Evangeline moved closer to the bars, studying Mira like a specimen under glass. "Did you really think we wouldn't investigate? A foundling with no family, no history, no breeding, somehow catching the eye of the most powerful alpha in the 5 kingdoms. It defies all logic. The bond is a lie." The words hit like physical blows. "Do you know what we found when we looked into your past, little mouse? Nothing. No record of your birth, no family name. Nothing but a note left with a baby at a convent gate. And do you know what kind of women abandon their children like that?" Mira's throat was tight. "Witches, cursed women who birth cursed children and know better than to keep them." Lady Evangeline's smile widened. "Your mother was probably burned at the stake years ago for the same crimes you're about to face." "That's not true." "Isn't it? How else do you explain what happened? And nobody like you, somehow convincing the most eligible alpha in the world that you're his mate." She laughed, the sound echoing off stone walls. "Even you can't be foolish enough to believe that's real." But as the words hit her, something else hit harder. A memory. 3 nights ago, when Darius had cupped her face in his hands and asked to kiss her. The way he'd looked at her like she was everything. The tenderness in his voice when he'd said her name. That hadn't been magic. It had been real. "You're wrong," Mira said quietly. "Am I? Then where is he? If this bond is so powerful, so unbreakable, where is your precious king now?" Lady Evangeline gestured to the empty corridor. "You've been down here for hours and he hasn't come. Doesn't that tell you something?" It did tell her something. It told her that Darius didn't know where she was, because if he did, if he knew, nothing would have stopped him from coming for her. "He doesn't know," she said, more to herself than to Lady Evangeline. "Of course he knows. Lord Castellan presented the evidence to him this morning, the testimonies, the witnesses, the proof of your witchcraft." Lady Evangeline's voice turned mockingly gentle. "He signed the execution order himself, little mouse. Dawn tomorrow. They'll burn you in the courtyard where everyone can see what happens to servants who forget their place." The words landed like ice water in her veins. Execution order. Signed by Darius. No. The word came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, and do you know what he said when Lord Castellan told him what you really were?" Lady Evangeline leaned closer to the bars, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He said he should have known better than to trust his instincts over his duty. He said you'd made a fool of him long enough." Mira sank back down to the mouldy straw, her legs giving out. It wasn't true. It couldn't be true. But the doubt that had been whispering in the back of her mind since her arrest grew louder. 3 days, 3 perfect days where she'd started to believe in impossible things, where she'd let herself think that maybe, just maybe, she could be someone worth choosing. But fairy tales weren't real. Kings didn't fall in love with kitchen servants, and nobody like her got happy endings. "I see you're beginning to understand," Lady Evangeline said with satisfaction. "Good. It will make tomorrow easier for everyone." She turned to leave, her skirts rustling against stone. "Lady Evangeline," Mira called, her voice hoarse. The woman paused. When this is over, will you tell him something for me?" "What?" Mira closed her eyes, remembering the way Darius had smiled at her in the garden, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. "Tell him I'm sorry for whatever I did, for making him believe in something that wasn't real." Lady Evangeline's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. "I will," she said, "though I doubt he'll care to hear it." The footsteps faded, leaving Mira alone with the darkness and the dripping water and the weight of her own stupidity. She'd been right to be scared, right to doubt, right to know that people like her didn't get to be queens. Tomorrow they would burn her, and maybe that was what she deserved for daring to dream above her station. But as she sat in the straw and waited for dawn, one thought kept echoing in her mind. A memory of storm-grey eyes and gentle hands, and a voice saying, "You already are exactly what I need." Had that been magic too? Or had it been the only real thing in her entire life? She was still wondering when the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridor. Heavy boots, multiple sets, moving fast. Then a roar that shook dust from the ceiling. A sound of pure rage that was more animal than human. "Mira!" Her head snapped up. She knew that voice. "Mira, where are you?" "Here," she called, scrambling to her feet. "I'm here." The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by shouting and what sounded like combat. Metal on metal, grunts of pain, the crack of bone against stone. Then the corridor filled with light, and Darius appeared at her cell door. He looked like an avenging angel, and a man who'd torn through anyone stupid enough to stand between him and what he wanted. His clothes were dishevelled, his hair wild, and there was blood on his knuckles. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Storm-grey fire, desperate, furious, afraid, real. "Thank God," he breathed, then turned to someone behind him. "Get this door open, now." "Your Majesty," came the reply, Captain Morris of the King's Guard. "The key?" "I don't care if you have to tear the entire dungeon apart. Get her out." There was the sound of metal grinding against metal, then the screech of ancient hinges. The cell door swung open, and Darius was moving toward her, his hands reaching out like he needed to touch her to believe she was real. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, his hands ghosting over her arms, her face checking for injuries. "Did they? Gods, Mira, I'm so sorry. I should have been faster. I should have—" "You came," she whispered, and the words broke something loose in her chest. Of course I came." He cupped her face in his hands, and they were shaking. "I will always come for you. Always." "But Lady Evangeline said—" "Lady Evangeline lied." His voice turned deadly. "About everything. I never signed any execution order. I didn't even know you were missing until Anna came to find me an hour ago. Lord Castellan told everyone I was in emergency council meetings, but I was in my study the whole time, working on trade agreements. Relief flooded through her so fast it made her dizzy. The witnesses, paid actors, every single one of them. We have 3 of them in custody already, and they're singing like larks about who hired them. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away tears she didn't realise she'd shed. There was no witchcraft, Mira. No magic except what's supposed to be there. The bond is real. We are real. I thought, when you didn't come, I didn't know. His voice broke slightly. God help me. I didn't know, but I should have. I should have felt it through the bond when you were afraid. The drugs, she realised, they're still affecting me, aren't they? Making it harder for the bond to work properly? He nodded grimly. We'll fix that. But first, he stood, his arms sliding around her waist to support her. We have a trial to attend. A trial? Lord Castellan's, for treason, conspiracy, and kidnapping the future queen. His smile was sharp and dangerous, and completely without mercy. He wanted a public spectacle. He's going to get one. An hour later, Mira stood in the great hall wearing a simple but elegant dress that Anna had found for her. Her hair was clean and braided with silver ribbon, and she felt almost human again. Almost. The hall was packed with nobles and servants alike, all of them whispering and staring, some with curiosity, some with sympathy, and some, like Lady Celestine, who sat with her mother in the front row, with barely concealed hostility. Lord Castellan stood in chains before the throne, his face pale but defiant. Behind him, the 3 men who'd posed as witnesses knelt under guard, their clothes rough and their faces terrified. "You stand accused of conspiracy against the crown," Darius said from his throne, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Of kidnapping, of fabricating evidence, and of attempting to murder my mate. How do you answer?" "I did what was necessary," Lord Castellan said, lifting his chin. "That girl is nobody, a foundling with no name, no family, no worth. She doesn't belong here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Darius didn't move. "You're right," he said calmly. "She has no noble name, no family connections, no political value whatsoever." Mira's heart stopped. Beside her she heard Anna suck in a sharp breath. "She's also," Darius continued, rising from his throne, "the bravest, kindest, most intelligent woman I've ever met. She's the missing piece of my soul. She's the answer to every prayer I've ever said. She's my mate, chosen by the goddess herself." He stepped down from the dais, his eyes never leaving Lord Castellan's face. "And she's going to be my queen, not because of her bloodline or her family's power or her political connections, but because she's everything I never knew I needed." The hall was completely silent now. "So let me be very clear," Darius said, his voice soft and absolutely lethal. "Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Anyone who hurts her answers to me. And anyone foolish enough to try to take her from me will discover exactly why they call me the Alpha King." He turned then, his gaze finding Mira in the crowd. And when their eyes met, that golden thread between them blazed to life, stronger than ever. "Mira," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "will you stand with me?" Every eye in the hall turned to her, every breath held. She could refuse, walk away, go back to being nobody, nothing, invisible. Or she could choose to believe in impossible things. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I will." The smile that spread across Darius's face could have lit the entire kingdom. And as she walked through the crowd toward him, toward her future, toward her choice, toward the man who'd seen her hiding in shadows and decided she was everything. Mira realized something. She wasn't nothing. She was chosen. And that made all the difference in the world. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. Lord Castellan was stripped of his lands and title. exiled to the northern wastes where winter lasted 9 months of the year. His co-conspirators faced the executioner's block, though Mira had asked Darius for mercy for the paid actors who'd simply needed coin to feed their families. Lady Evangeline, who delivered the lies that nearly broke Mira's spirit, found herself suddenly unwelcome at court and departed for her family estates with her reputation in ruins. But those were just the external changes. The real transformation was happening in Mira herself. "Hold your shoulders back," instructed Madame Corvina, the formidable woman Darius had hired to teach Mira the intricacies of court etiquette. "You are to be queen, my dear. Queens do not apologize for taking up space." Mira straightened, adjusting her posture as she'd been taught. 3 weeks ago, the idea of lessons in deportment and protocol would have terrified her. Now she found herself eager to learn, hungry to understand this world she was becoming part of. "Better," Madame Corvina said with approval. "Now, when the Duchess of Westmere arrives for the harvest celebration, how do you greet her?" "With recognition of her status, but acknowledgement of my own position as future queen," Mira replied carefully. "I incline my head precisely 3 degrees, no more, no less." "Excellent. And if she attempts to test your knowledge of her family's history?" I smile and redirect the conversation to something that benefits the kingdom. Her family's new shipping routes, perhaps, or their success with the grain harvests. Madame Corvina's stern expression softened into something that might have been pride. "You learn quickly, Your Majesty, much quicker than most nobles I've worked with." The title still felt strange, but less so each day. Mira was beginning to understand that being queen wouldn't mean pretending to be someone else. It would mean becoming the fullest version of herself. That afternoon, she found herself in the castle's accounting office, poring over ledgers with Master Henrik, the kingdom's treasurer. What had begun as curiosity about how the kingdom managed its resources had turned into genuine fascination. "The northern provinces are struggling," she said, tracing a column of figures with her finger. "Their tax burden is higher, but their crop yields have been poor for 3 seasons running." Master Henrik nodded grimly. "Aye, Your Majesty, we've been discussing relief measures, but the southern lords resist any reduction in northern contributions." "Because they'd have to make up the difference," Mira mused. "But what if we approach it differently? The northern provinces have excellent craftsmen, woodworkers, metalworkers. What if we establish trade partnerships instead of just demanding taxes?" The treasurer's eyebrows rose. "An interesting proposition. The Crown could commission goods from northern artisans, paying fair prices instead of collecting taxes." "Exactly, and we could arrange for southern grain to go north in exchange for northern crafts going south. Everyone benefits." "I'll draft a proposal for His Majesty's review," Master Henrik said, making notes in the margins of his ledger. "This could revolutionize how we handle regional economics." Later that evening, Mira found Darius in his study, reading reports by lamplight. She'd learned over the past weeks that this was his favourite time of day, the quiet hours when the castle settled into sleep and he could focus on the endless details of running a kingdom. "Working late again?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up with the smile that never failed to make her heart skip. "Always, but I have excellent company now." She moved to the chair beside his desk, her chair he'd insisted, having it brought in the day after her rescue. "Master Henrik is excited about the Northern Province proposal." "As am I." He set down his reports and gave her his full attention. "Where did that idea come from?" "The kitchen," she said, surprising him. "When I worked there, I noticed we threw away so much food while the servants from the outer provinces talked about going hungry. It seemed wasteful, wrong." Darius reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You see connections other people miss, problems and solutions. Is that queen-like enough?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, tinged with the insecurity she was still learning to overcome. "It's exactly queen-like." His voice was serious now. "Do you know what most nobles would have done with those ledgers?" She shook her head, glanced at the totals and moved on. But you saw people behind the numbers, families struggling, craftsmen with unused skills, opportunities for connection instead of exploitation. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. That's not just queen-like, Mira. That's what this kingdom has been missing. Warmth bloomed in her chest, the same golden feeling she'd experienced that first day in the corridor, but stronger now, steadier, less like a sudden flame and more like a hearth fire that would burn for years. The bond feels different, she said, stronger. The drugs are finally out of your system completely. His eyes darkened slightly. Can you feel her, your wolf? Mira closed her eyes, reaching inward. There, a presence at the edge of her consciousness, watchful, patient, ready. She's waiting, she said softly. For what? For me to be ready to meet her. That night they walked together to a clearing deep in the castle's forest. The moon was full overhead, casting silver light through the trees. Mira could feel her wolf stirring, responding to the call of the lunar cycle. There's no pressure, Darius said gently. If it doesn't happen tonight, we can try again. But Mira could feel it building inside her, the need to shift, to become what she'd always been meant to be. The suppression drugs had kept her from this for 19 years. She was ready to reclaim what was hers. She closed her eyes and reached for the presence in her mind. Her wolf met her halfway, and suddenly the world exploded into sensation. The shift was nothing like pain. It was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering, like remembering something vital that she'd forgotten. Her bones sang as they reformed. Her muscles rejoiced as they found their true shape. When it was over, she opened eyes that were now gold instead of brown and saw the world with supernatural clarity. Every scent was distinct, pine and earth and the musk of small animals. Every sound was amplified. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the steady heartbeat of the man standing beside her. She looked up at Darius, who had shifted as well. His wolf was magnificent, coal black with silver markings, larger than seemed possible. Alpha in every line of his powerful frame. When their eyes met, the bond blazed between them like starfire. Not just emotional anymore, but physical, spiritual, complete. She could feel his wonder, his joy, his fierce protective love, and underneath it all, a certainty that was bedrock solid. Mates, true mates, recognized by moon and magic and the ancient laws that governed their kind. They ran together through the forest, side by side, equal in their wild forms even if human society would question their match. The wolf in Mira was pure joy, revelling in strength she'd never known she possessed. When they shifted back, she was laughing with the pure delight of it. "How do you feel?" Darius asked, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Whole," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel whole." 2 days later, a commotion in the courtyard drew them to the windows of Darius's study. A merchant caravan had arrived, but it was what followed behind the wagons that made Mira's breath catch. Refugees, dozens of them, thin and travel-worn, with the hollow look of people who'd lost everything. "Bandits hit the eastern settlements," Captain Morris reported when they reached the courtyard. "Burned 3 villages, took what they could carry. These folks have been walking for 2 weeks." Mira looked at the children clinging to their parents' hands, at the elderly leaning heavily on walking sticks, at the young mothers clutching babies to their chests. Something fierce and protective rose in her chest. "They need food," she said, "and shelter, medical attention for the injured." "The castle can house perhaps 20, Captain Morris said doubtfully, "but there are nearly 60 people here." "Then we make room." Mira turned to Darius. "The Great Hall, we can set up temporary shelters there, and the kitchens can prepare meals." "The Great Hall is for state functions," protested Lord Bertram, the castle's seneschal. "We can't house refugees there. It wouldn't be proper." "It will be proper when I say it's proper," Mira said, her voice carrying new authority. "Those people need help, and we have the means to provide it." She turned to the refugees, many of whom were staring at her with a mixture of hope and fear. A woman near the front clutched a baby who couldn't be more than 6 months old. The child was too quiet, too still. "You're safe now," Mira called to them, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "We'll take care of you." She moved toward the woman with the baby, her heart breaking at the exhaustion in the mother's eyes. "May I?" she asked gently, holding out her arms. The woman hesitated for just a moment, then passed over her child. The baby was burning with fever, its breathing shallow. Without thinking, Mira placed her hand on the tiny chest and reached for something she didn't know she possessed. Warmth flowed through her, golden and healing. The baby's breathing eased, its fever broke, and it opened bright eyes to look at her with curiosity instead of pain. Gasps rose from the refugees, from the castle staff, from Darius, who moved to stand beside her. "How did you—" the mother whispered. Mira looked down at her hands, still glowing faintly with residual power. "I don't know." But Darius was smiling, wonder in his eyes. "Healing magic. It's rare among our kind, but not unheard of. Your wolf carries the gift." Over the following days, Mira threw herself into caring for the refugees. She organised shelter and food distribution. She helped the castle healers tend the injured, and she used her newfound healing abilities wherever they were needed most. The great hall was transformed into a temporary village, and somehow it felt more alive than it ever had during formal state dinners. "You're glowing," Anna commented one evening as she helped Mira prepare for dinner. "I am not glowing," Mira protested, though she caught sight of herself in the mirror and had to admit there was truth to Anna's words. She looked radiant, happy, purposeful. "The people love you already," Anna continued, braiding silver ribbon through Mira's hair. "They're calling you the Healing Queen." "I'm not queen yet." "You are in every way that matters," Anna said firmly. "A crown is just jewellery. Leadership is something else entirely." That evening at dinner, Darius announced their engagement officially. The great hall, now cleared of refugees who'd been settled in temporary housing in the town, filled with nobles and dignitaries who'd come for the harvest celebration. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, rising from his chair at the high table, "it is my great pleasure to announce that Lady Mira has consented to be my wife and your future queen." The applause was polite, but not enthusiastic. Mira could see the calculation in noble eyes, the whispered conversations behind fans and wine cups. She was still the nobody who dared to reach above her station. But then Lord Henrik stood, his weathered face serious. "If I may, Your Majesty, I've had the privilege of working with Lady Mira on several projects these past weeks. Her insights into kingdom management have been extraordinary." "Oh?" Darius's voice held amusement. "Do tell." "Her proposal for the northern provinces will revolutionise our approach to regional economics, and her handling of the refugee crisis has been nothing short of masterful. She didn't just provide charity, she organised sustainable solutions." More murmurs, these tinged with surprise and growing respect. "Furthermore," Lord Henrik continued, "she's been personally involved in healing the sick and injured. The goddess has blessed her with gifts that will serve this kingdom well." This time the applause was warmer. Not everyone was convinced. Mira could still see sceptical faces in the crowd, but doubt was being replaced by curiosity. That night, as they prepared for bed, Mira caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror in her chamber. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the terrified kitchen servant who'd been arrested 3 weeks ago. This woman stood straight, her shoulders back and her chin lifted. This woman wore fine clothes as if she belonged in them. This woman had golden eyes that sparkled with confidence and purpose. "I don't recognise myself," she said softly. Darius appeared behind her in the mirror, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "You haven't changed, you've just stopped hiding." "Have I?" "The woman who healed that baby today, that was always you. The woman who saw solutions where others saw only problems. That was always you." His hands squeezed gently. "I didn't fall in love with someone you were pretending to be, Mira. I fell in love with who you actually are." She leaned back against his chest, solid and warm and utterly reliable. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Tomorrow was their wedding, small and private, the way they'd both wanted it. No grand political spectacle, just them and their closest friends, and the vows that would bind them together forever. "I've been ready since the moment I saw you hiding behind that door," he murmured into her hair. "The question is, are you?" Mira looked at herself in the mirror one more time, at the woman she'd become, at the man who'd seen her worth before she'd seen it herself, at the life they were building together. "Yes," she said, and for the first time she truly meant it without reservation. "I'm ready." Outside their window, the moon shone silver over the kingdom they would soon rule together, and in the distance wolves howled, a sound of celebration, of recognition, of two souls finding their perfect match. The girl who'd believed she was nothing was gone. In her place stood a queen. Mira woke on her wedding morning to golden sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of Anna humming softly as she prepared the bridal gown. "Today's the day," Anna said with a smile that could have rivaled the sunrise. "How are you feeling, Your Majesty?" "Like I'm about to marry my best friend," Mira said, stretching beneath silk sheets that still felt impossibly luxurious, "and like I might actually deserve it." "Might?" Anna raised an eyebrow. "Child, you've revolutionized this kingdom in 6 weeks. The northern provinces are thriving, the refugee settlements are becoming permanent communities, and half the noble ladies in court are trying to copy your healing techniques. You don't might deserve anything. You've earned it 10 times over." The dress Anna had chosen was perfect. Ivory silk that fell in simple, elegant lines, with sleeves that reached her wrists and a neckline that was modest but flattering. No jewels except for the silver circlet that would mark her as queen, and a pendant that had belonged to Darius's mother. "She would have loved you," Anna said softly as she fastened the necklace. "Queen Isabella always said the kingdom needed a ruler who remembered what it meant to struggle." Mira touched the pendant, a simple silver wolf with amber eyes. "I hope I can be half the queen she was." "You'll be exactly the queen you're meant to be." An hour later, Mira stood at the entrance to the castle's chapel, her hand tucked into the crook of Master Henrik's arm. The elderly treasurer had volunteered to escort her down the aisle, saying gruffly that someone should represent all the common folk who'd found their voice through her. "Ready, my dear?" he asked. Through the open doors she could see the small gathering of people they'd chosen to share this moment. Anna and Captain Morris, Madame Corvina and the castle healers, a handful of nobles who'd proven themselves genuine friends. And at the altar, beneath a cascade of white roses and autumn leaves, stood Darius. He wore simple formal clothes in midnight blue, his hair combed back but still rebellious at the edges. When their eyes met across the chapel, his face lit up with a smile that made her knees weak and her heart sore. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The ceremony was intimate and perfect. They'd written their own vows, words that spoke of choosing each other every day, of building something beautiful together, of love that was both fierce and gentle. When Darius slipped the golden wedding band onto her finger, beside the engagement ring that had appeared on her pillow one morning without explanation, Mira felt the bond between them sing with joy. "By the power vested in me by the goddess and the laws of this kingdom," the priestess intoned, "I pronounce you husband and wife, king and queen, mates eternal." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them their small congregation cheered, but Mira barely heard it. The world had narrowed to storm-grey eyes and warm lips, and the certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. The reception was held in the gardens, with tables set beneath the oak trees where they'd shared their first real conversation. Simple food, good wine, and laughter that echoed off the stone walls. As the sun set and candles were lit, Darius stood to speak. "6 weeks ago, I thought I knew what I wanted in a queen," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the warm evening air. Someone with the right bloodline, the right connections, the right training, someone who could fit into the role that already existed. He turned to Mira, his eyes soft with love. What I got instead was someone who didn't fit the role, someone who remade it entirely, someone who saw problems where I saw statistics, who saw people where I saw subjects, who saw possibilities where I saw limitations. Mira felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. They say a good queen serves her people, Darius continued, but Mira has taught me that a great queen helps her people serve each other. She doesn't just rule, she heals. She doesn't just command, she connects. She doesn't just reign, she transforms. He raised his glass. To my wife, my mate, my queen, and to the kingdom we'll build together, one where everyone has a chance to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. The toast was echoed by everyone present, and Mira had to wipe away tears before she could respond. "A year ago, I believed I was nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her chest. "I thought my purpose was to stay invisible, to serve without being seen, to exist without taking up space. I was wrong about all of it." She looked around at the faces surrounding her, people who'd become family, friends, trusted advisors. "I learned that being chosen isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about seeing the connections between things, the ways we can lift each other up instead of tear each other down. It's about believing that everyone, no matter where they come from, has something valuable to offer." She turned back to Darius. "And I learned that love isn't something you earn by becoming someone else. It's something you accept by becoming fully yourself." Later that night, they walked together through the castle corridors, Mira's hand tucked securely in Darius's. The formal festivities were over, but the real celebration was just beginning. "Have I told you today that you're extraordinary?" he murmured as they reached their chambers. "Only about 12 times," she said, laughing, "but I wouldn't object to hearing it again." "You're extraordinary," he said seriously, stopping to frame her face with his hands. "You're brilliant and kind and stronger than you know. You're going to change this kingdom, Mira. You already have." "We're going to change it," she corrected. "Together." 6 months later, Queen Mira stood on the balcony of the castle's highest tower, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, watching her husband work with the master builders on plans for the new healing centre that would serve the outer provinces. The kingdom was thriving in ways no one had imagined. The northern provinces had become centres of craft and trade. The refugee settlements had grown into prosperous towns. The healing arts were being taught to anyone who showed aptitude, regardless of birth or status. And in noble houses across the 5 kingdoms, young women were learning that a queen could be more than ornamental. They were studying economics and medicine, agriculture and diplomacy. They were preparing to lead, not just to look beautiful doing it. The council meeting ran long, Darius said, appearing behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "How are you feeling?" "Perfect," she said, leaning back against his chest. "The healer says the baby is strong and healthy." "Like her mother." "How do you know it's a girl?" "I just do." His hands splayed protectively over her belly. "She's going to be just like you, fierce and brilliant and completely unstoppable." "And if it's a boy?" "Then he'll be lucky to have you as his example of what strength really looks like." 2 years after that, their daughter was indeed born, Princess Elena, who inherited her mother's golden eyes and her father's stubborn streak, and who showed early signs of both healing magic and an uncanny ability to make the castle cats follow her in orderly processions. 5 years later, their son arrived, Prince Marcus, who had his father's storm-grey eyes and his mother's gentle heart, and who could somehow convince anyone to share their toys just by smiling at them. And 15 years after a terrified kitchen servant had hidden behind a door, Queen Mira sat in her private garden, surrounded by grandchildren and roses, watching her grown children rule with the same combination of strength and compassion she'd tried to model. Her hair was silver now, threaded with white, but her eyes were still bright with the intelligence that had caught a king's attention and the kindness that had won a kingdom's heart. Beside her, King Darius was reading reports, but his free hand rested on hers, fingers intertwined the way they'd been for decades. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "Giving up the quiet life you might have had?" Mira considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret the pain it took to get here. I regret the years I spent believing I was worthless. I regret that it took so long to find my courage." She squeezed his hand. "But regret choosing this life with you. Regret the children we raised, the kingdom we built, the love we shared. Never. Even though I dragged you out of hiding." "You didn't drag me anywhere," she said firmly. "You offered me a choice. You waited for me to make it. And when I was ready, you helped me become everything I never knew I could be." "We helped each other," he corrected. That evening, as they walked through the same corridors where they'd first met, Mira marvelled at how much had changed. Portraits of their children lined the walls now, along with paintings of the healing centres and schools and libraries they'd built throughout the kingdom. But some things remained the same. The golden thread that connected them was as strong as ever. The way he looked at her still made her heart skip, and every night when they went to sleep, she still felt like the luckiest woman in the world. "I have something to tell you," Darius said, as they reached their chambers. "Oh?" "I've been thinking about succession planning. Elena's ready to take on more responsibilities, and Marcus has been asking about diplomatic training." Mira smiled. "Are you suggesting we consider retiring?" "I'm suggesting we consider taking more time for ourselves, travelling maybe, seeing the kingdom we built from the ground level instead of from the throne room." The idea was appealing. They were still young enough for adventure, still curious about the world beyond their borders. "Where would you want to go first?" she asked. "Anywhere," he said simply, "as long as I'm with you." And as Mira looked into the storm-grey eyes that had seen her worth before she'd seen it herself, she knew that whatever adventures lay ahead, they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else, together. 30 years after a kitchen servant had been chosen by an alpha king, Mira finally understood the truth that had taken her so long to learn. She'd never been nobody. She'd never been nothing. She'd always been exactly what she was meant to be. She just needed someone to help her see it. And in the end, that was the greatest magic of all. Where are you listening from? I'd love to meet you in the comments and hear your thoughts about Mira and Darius's story. If you enjoyed this tale of finding worth in unexpected places, you might want to subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people discover these stories about love, healing, and the magic of being seen for who you really are.